Okay, now that we did a quick overview of each empire, the Ottomans and Mughals, we get into 10.1a. Powerful Eurasian states and empires faced and responded to challenges in 1750. Students will compare and contrast the Mughal Empire and the Ottoman Empire in 1750 in terms of religious and ethnic tolerance, political organization, and commercial activity. Well, there's a little problem when starting into this. Are we going to look at exactly 1750, which is on the tail end and a cultural falling of these two empires, or do we also look at their height? Well, we don't exactly know currently what the questions will be, whether the actual questions on the New York State test want us to look at the falling and decline of these empires in 1750, or if they're going to ask questions that relate to the height of the golden ages of these empires, because it's very different, okay? The religious and ethnic tolerance. So let's just take an extra moment to go back to the golden age of these empires and then see how it changed, and we'll snapshot in 1750. That way you're able to talk intelligently about both time periods of the empires. And quite frankly, I think it teaches a very good lesson, because the general idea is the more religious and ethnically tolerant these empires were, the better they did. And when they started putting religious and ethnic rules in place to control their diverse groups of people in the empires, people got angry and things went poorly. So it's a pretty good life lesson for any current nation today who has a large diverse population, which is allow religious and ethnic tolerances. So let's take a look at the height of the Ottoman and Mughal empires. They were both Islamic empires with the Muslim religion intertwined with the politics and the laws. And both empires had many different religions that they had united and conquered into their empire. So in the Ottomans, during their height, the largest non-Muslim religions were Christians and Jews, and they were allowed religious freedoms to some degree. In certain areas, the Christians and Jews had full control of their own religion, and they governed themselves to some degree. The Ottoman Empire was very open and diverse in its government. So if you were Christian or a Jew, you could rise high in the Ottoman government. You could make lots of money in different professions. Okay? And this is not to say everything is complicated. This is not to say life was perfect. There's still discrimination, and there's still different classes of people based upon religion in the height of the Ottoman Empire. But what I am saying is there was social mobility, and there were avenues to excel and add to the intellectual, financial power of the area, regardless of the religion. It is important to note, because we're talking about ethnic tolerance, that the Ottoman Empire had not a small number of slaves from different places in their empire, and also from Eastern and Central Africa. So if we were to say, is there parts of the empire that are, how we would say, not tolerant? Well, both empires started by conquest, so that would be intolerant of other people, conquering them. And once people are conquered, a trafficking in slaves shows some sort of ethnic intolerance. Just the fact that slavery was a part of the empire is a form of intolerance. But while the religious tolerance was mostly high, the Ottoman Empire flourished. Similarly, for a 50 or 60 year period in the Mughal Empire, specifically under Akbar, which means great, there was very much religious tolerance. Akbar married many Hindu princesses, and the story goes that he never made them convert, and they were able to keep their religion. So the Hindu religion was respected by the Muslim leaders. Akbar got rid of the non-Muslim tax. So if you were Hindu or other religions in India, you would not have to pay a non-Muslim tax. That made people very happy. Akbar brought in what is it, Jesuit Christian tutors for people in the court, I think specifically his sons. So members of other religions were valued for what they could bring to the civilization and the empire. Non-Muslims could hold high office. And traditions, there were multiple different traditions and different local traditions, not just religions, were blended, and this was seen in art and architecture and literature. So during the 60 years of probably the golden age part of the Mughal Empire, a willingness and ethnic tolerance and a religious tolerance really added to the culture of that empire. But then we see, as subsequent and next leaders stopped being more tolerant, the people within their empire resented it, and religions and ethnicities were targeted. And there's a very clear change after Akbar and the Mughal, which will take us all the way from up to the 1750s, where we start in the curriculum. The Muslim leaders of the Mughal Empire were not very tolerant of different religions. Sikhs in particular were targeted. Hindus got an extreme tax on them. Muslim laws that went against cultural traditions of Hindus and Sikhs were strictly enforced. So the people living in the Mughal Empire had to adhere to Muslim laws even if they weren't Muslim. And the government, Hindus were outed from the government, and the government got much less diverse. And we can see that from 1700 up till 1750, where we start our curriculum, the Mughal Empire was basically split into local areas. It was not unified. There were many different religions and local areas that did not like the Mughal rulers. And because it was not unified, we are going to see the Europeans come into India and eventually the British take over because the Mughal Empire was splitting because of religious and ethnic intolerance. The Ottoman Empire stayed around for longer. There was less tolerance after their golden age, and we see that many more, not only did the Ottoman Empire lose land, many more peoples inside of the Ottoman Empire wanted out. And we see the Ottoman Empire actually ending at the end of World War I. And the religious and ethnic intolerance was so much so that in the late 1800s, in the early 1900s, we get an Armenian genocide, where the rulers of the Ottoman Empire enacted a genocide against the Christian Armenians in the heart of their empire. So we see the ultimate showing of religious and ethnic intolerance culminating in the Armenian genocide. So the pattern for religious and ethnic tolerance is, at one time, they were comparatively both pretty tolerant, and then as they became more intolerant, the empires weakened. Okay, let's take a little look into the comparisons of the political organization of both empires. They were both Islamic empires where the Muslim religion was connected to the government, whereas not necessarily theocracies. It was religion was very important in the empire and the rulers. They were both ruled by absolute rulers that had total singular control over their whole empire. And they had efficient bureaucracies. Okay, the governments were a very simple way to do it is to separate the empire into areas. Each area has representatives that keep going up and up until it's all overseen by a central capital city. For example, Istanbul in the Ottoman Empire used to be Constantinople, and it's a very efficient system. Everyone knows their place in the governmental system. The usually chosen by merit. The governments were valuing if you could do a good job in the government. So when it's running really well, you have really good people that are efficient in their job running the governments. And so things just run better that way as an empire. And each one had an efficient tax system that didn't get people. I mean, this is more of an old style government that have, a singular ruler, a singular king or emperor. It doesn't really have a lot of comparisons to today in a lot of the governments. Most governments are some form of democracy today. But one thing we can definitely take out of that is the governing with good people in the government and an efficient tax system. Both had an efficient tax system that didn't tax people so much that they got angry, but taxed enough to fund the government. So both of them, when things were going well, had a very efficient tax system. And when we pick up the story in 1750, the Ottomans had less of everything, that the good that we were just talking about. They were on a decline as an empire, but they were still chugging along pretty acceptably and pretty okay. They weren't as unified as they were at their height. The Mughal Empire was basically at its end in 1750. They were not unified. They were split into rebellious states. The tax system was bad. The leaders of the government were not efficient. And everything was falling apart at exactly 1750 for the Mughal Empire. And that can be directly attributed to the political organization. So the way they differed, the Ottomans held on to a much better political organization for longer than the Mughal Empire did. Okay, let's end with a comparison of commercial activity in 1750. And we are going to focus right in on 1750. We won't talk about the height of the empires, although the height of the empires was built upon trade. And in 1750, both of these empires were still running. They were using trade for growth and wealth. Trade was huge, over thousands of miles from city to city, all different types of goods. Okay? And they were benefiting from it. The Ottoman Empire was the crossroads of three continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. The Mughal Empire had both land routes in Asia and water routes over to Africa and Southeast Asia. Okay, and trade was important, but this is the end, the turning point where each of these civilizations lost their power of trade, right around 1750. The Ottomans lost their power to ocean trade. The key new European trade routes were going over the Atlantic Ocean and going around Africa to India and Southeast Asia into China. And so the Ottomans were losing ground to ocean trade. And they were about ready to lose to Europeans' industrial revolution and steamships and factories. So eventually the world is going to change, and the Ottomans are going to lose trade advantage just to the new ocean trade and the new technology of the Industrial Revolution. The Mughal Empire in India, they are also going to lose to colonialization. They had the highest demanded goods in the world, such as tea, such as silk, such as cotton goods, some of the highest, finest cotton goods, cloth in the world. They had land and water routes, but in 1750, because the Mughal Empire was not unified, the British East India Company is going to have more and more influence over all of India in trade, and eventually Britain is going to fully take over all of India as a colony. And so in the new Industrial Revolution world, the Mughal Empire trade is going to fall in power to be replaced by, as a colony of Britain, and their home goods that they made that gave them so much value are going to be replaced by factory-made goods. So we see in 1750, it's the start of the end for the trade of the Mughal Empire. And so those are the comparisons of the Ottomans and the Mughals in 1750. It's really close to within 100 years of a major turning point into modern history. And we pick up the story of those two empires right at that turning point. All right, thanks for watching.